It's hard to believe, but it's already week 6 of the college football season, and we are back with the FSU versus NC State edition of the Nole Your Enemy Scouting Report. It's a huge game in the Atlantic division for both NC State and Florida State as they try to keep pace with Clemson and surprisingly Syracuse. And so we are joined today by publisher of the WolfpackCentral.com rivals NC State website, JC Simbal. JC, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, like I said, it's a huge game. Obviously, both teams coming off very physical, hard-fought games and losses. NC State loses to Clemson 30-20, and obviously Florida State lost to Wake Forest 31-21. So it makes this game more important than last week's in order for these guys to stay in the ACC Atlantic race. NC State's off to a 4-1 start with victories over East Carolina, Charleston Southern, Texas Tech, and UConn. JC, just your overall impressions of NC State right now, as opposed to what you expected coming into the season.
Defensively, I think they're right on point. You know, the 30 points against Clemson is a little misleading in some ways, but Clemson's offense is very, very good. But really impressed with their defense. Special teams have been good. What has struggled from start to, for against any of the better teams that they've played, whether East Carolina, a little bit of Texas Tech, definitely against Clemson, is there hasn't been a lot of big plays on offense. A lot of singles, a lot of doubles, but not a lot of home runs. Everybody talked going into the Clemson game that Wake Forest took shot after shot after shot downfield, completed passes, drew pass interference penalties, and that was one way of hurting the Clemson defense, which has a banged up secondary. State tried 4 times to go downfield, completed once for I think 32 yards of Devin Carter, and that was it. So everything else was more, maybe a 20-yard ball down the seam, but I mean most of it was underneath stuff. I wouldn't call it dinking and dunking, but more of a short controlled passing game is how I would refer to it. So that has kind of been a problem. It showed up in the East Carolina game in the opener, but you figured, okay, they have time to figure that out. But going into the FSU game, they still have not found that dynamic downfield passing threat.
Yeah, well, and you mentioned that, and your NC State is 51st in plays over 10 yards, both run and pass. But as you said, they have been very successful in an intermediate passing game, 28th in the nation in pass plays between 10 and 19 yards. But they have not found the big play offense, as you mentioned, and that's one thing Florida State has done this year. Just talk about, Devin Leary's 62% passer this year, 10 touchdowns, 3 INTs, third on the team in rushing attempts with 21 rushes. Just talk about his season, and then we'll get into, the new faces at the skill positions, which is probably you lost some playmakers off last year's team, that's for sure. Just get a little bit into Devin's season so far.
Devin has been okay. He hasn't been great. And part of that is because of it's a team game.
Right.
He has a very strong arm. He can stand tall in the pocket and take a hit. He's not really mobile, but he's not like a statue either. But he has pretty good accuracy. For the most part. Like I said, he's been very good on the short intermediate stuff. But if the problem is that they've missed Emeka Emezi at wide receiver probably more than they anticipated.
Yeah.
And Thayer Thomas is a good receiver. He's a good college receiver. He's pretty much consistently going to get 6 to 9 catches almost every game. He's the one that does a lot of the dirty work in the receiving corps. But they don't have, like I mentioned earlier, they just don't have that deep threat. They have an H-back named Trent Penix, who was a high school running back that basically is a running back playing H-back. Very fast. He's been injured, and he's been missed. But the younger receivers that they were probably hoping to emerge this year still have yet to emerge, and that's affected Devin Leary. Clemson's defensive line definitely controlled the line of scrimmage. Every statistic that you could think of showed that. 3 sacks, 5 hurries. something like 30 some yards rushing on 21 carries after you take out the sack yardage. So the offensive line has been okay this year, but Clemson was definitely the better defensive line. But I always go back to the same thing. Who else has Clemson's down on the defensive line? Probably nobody else that they'll face this year. So, that it's one of those dynamics where, they could torch they could torch an okay defense. The question is what happens. The East Carolina defense rose up in the second half. The Clemson defense was very good. They did do a decent job against Texas Tech, but offensively, it's not one of those offenses. It's not like Wake Forest where they're going to score 30 some points every single game. They haven't reached that point in the season yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. You look at it. NC State is 94th in rushing offense, which goes to your struggles at the line of scrimmage. Now, where they have been, and it's weird. I did a lot of research. Where they do seem to be doing a very good job of, and you would think you would find more big plays in the passing game. They really keeping Leary clean for the most part. PFF has NC State's offensive line giving up 16 pressures all season, 4 sacks. Now, NC State themselves giving up 7 sacks on the season, and college football stats have them giving up 8. So anyway, it's 7 or 8, but at the end of the day, those numbers are pretty good for Devin Leary. Is there any chance that, would a Penix be back this week? How would he impact a big play offense?
Well, he got hurt in the season opener against East Carolina, which now seems like a forever ago.
Yep.
But so that was, early September. They thought 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
At that time. I mean, is there an outside shot he could be back? Perhaps. And they liked using him and Christopher Tootle as the H-backs. Christopher Tootle is a converted wide receiver. Penix was the converted running back. Tootle has not had the impact this year that he had last year for whatever reasons. Part of it maybe is too much responsibility with Penix out. I don't know. But, there's younger guys or less experienced guys like Tootle, Julian Gray, who I think only played 7 snaps against Clemson. Anthony Smith is a wide receiver who was injured against Clemson. Porter Rooks, who's older, but still kind of young in that he's kind of like in that gray area of still young enough. Those are the guys that I think they were hoping would step forward this year. And, they haven't had that breakout game.
Yeah, well, the one I will ask you this. Now, you go back and look at the drive charts against Clemson, and NC State had the ball 11 possessions. 5 of those possessions went for 8 plays or more. So they were able to produce some sustained drives. I know they had a fumble on one of those, I believe, 8-play, 75-yard drive maybe. Or no, I'm sorry, it was a 10-play, 42-yard drive. 42-yard drive that they fumbled. But they had a 15-play drive, a 10-play drive, a 10-play drive, and then an 8 and 9. Were you surprised that NC State was able to come up with sustained drives against that Clemson defense?
They did well in the first half. I would say in the second half, it fell off. It's funny, both games were kind of similar with NC State and Clemson and Wake Forest and FSU. NC State was outscored, I think, 24-3 or something.
Yeah.
And FSU was outscored 28-0 after taking the 7-0 lead, something like that. So, both teams, basically had prolonged streaks to win those games. State, first quarter, it was amazing to me in that, basically both teams had 1 possession apiece. And then you look up and on the second possession for either NC State or Clemson, there was only 19 seconds left in the first quarter.
Yeah.
How many times have you ever seen, 2 possessions basically eat up 14 and a half minutes of a quarter? So that was kind of like how the game started. They both kicked their field goals. Clemson looked sharper, but their drive stalled around the 2-yard line and they had to kick the chip shot. But in the second half, there wasn't that sustained drive as much. The running game kind of petered out. Then it became Leary having to throw every down. And that Clemson just did a very superb job of making sure that whatever State did, they had to earn it. There was nothing cheap gained against Clemson's defense.
No, and listen, I do want to ask you this question because I am impressed with this stat. You mentioned that they haven't been highly explosive as far as plays at 20-plus yards, but where they've been really good on offense with NC State has been their third down offense. They're 39th in the nation, converting 45% of their third down opportunities. What makes their third down offense go?
I think the biggest thing about them on third down is that they have to stay on track. They're not as good when, say, there's a penalty and it becomes 1st and 15 or 2nd and 12. They're not as good if there's a sack on first down, second down, and they're I don't know their numbers on 3rd and long, but there were some years when they had Ryan Finley and Jacoby Myers and Kelvin Harmon, and they all made the NFL. Jalen Samuels, he made the NFL. They were great on 3rd and long. They were almost uncanny about it. This year's team is not as strong on that, because I think what happens is if it is 3rd and long, I'm sure the defense totally concentrates on Thayer Thomas. I mean, I would. And, if you kind of if you can take him away on the 3rd and whatevers, then it makes a big difference. But, they've been fine. Their sweet spot is probably more like 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4, but they've not as done as well probably on the longer, and that's just staying on track, not having false start penalties, not getting us, giving up a sack or things like that.
Yeah, and to your point, Thayer Thomas leads the team with 24 receptions. The next closest guys are Keon Lassane with 15 and Devin Carter with 12. And tell us a little bit about Keon. He's kind of a new name to FSU fans that obviously follow the program closely. He's not a guy we remember from last year. What kind of player is he?
No, he had not done much leading up to this season. He had a very good spring, had a good spring game. Basically he was competing with former Rivals.com 4-star receiver Porter Rooks for that 3rd wideout role. Carter and Thomas were back. They brought in a transfer, Daryl Jones from Maryland, who was also a former 4-star recruit once upon a time. But Keon's, he's I wouldn't call him a smaller receiver, but he's just normal size. He has nice speed. He's done a nice job working the sidelines. He hasn't had that one big signature play yet. Again, goes back to they just haven't had that 40, 50, 60-yard touchdown type play yet. But he's been okay. They're trying to find the 3rd, 4th, and 5th receivers, even really the 2nd receiver, because Devin Carter's been inconsistent. That's been part of the struggle in the passing game.
Yeah. All right. Let's move over to the run game. Obviously, we mentioned 94th in the nation in rushing. Not great, obviously, but you got 2 good backs. They've been solid. Demi Sumo, I can't pronounce his last name. Y'all have to have a nickname for him.
He does have a nickname, Slimy Shark.
Slimy Shark.
Yeah, he doesn't like it though, but he put it on his huddle film and it just kind of took off.
All right, that's easier to say than I'm just going to call him Demi. How does that work?
Yeah.
All right, 44 rushes, 265 yards. He's a new name to Florida State fans and probably a new name this year to NC State, I would assume. And then you got Jordan Houston back, 40 carries for 185 yards. They have done and they've got 17 combined catches out of the backfield. They've done the vast majority of the running. There really is not another guy on the roster that has anywhere near close to their rush attempts. Just tell us a little bit about the strength of those two.
Jordan Houston is a slasher that runs outside very well. He's got good hands. They like to use him in the screen game. He's a smaller back at about 5'9", 5'10". I think he was a Maryland commit at one point. They kind of flipped him late after some things happened, but got on the field early and then basically didn't get to play as much the last 2 years because Zonovan Knight and Ricky Person were healthy and took over the roles. Both Knight and Person had a year of eligibility left, or Knight's case, maybe even more than one. But they both turned pro prematurely. So that opened up the door for Houston. Nice back, good college, a very solid college rotational running back. He's been a little tougher between the tackles than anticipated, but again, not a banger. He's not 210 plus pounds or anything like that, but he is quick. He has a good burst. Kind of similar to the FSU backs. Sumo Karmblay is a little bigger at maybe 210 pounds. It was one of those deals where he burned his red shirt last year, but he didn't play running back. I think he appeared in like 5 games on special teams. So, it was one of those situations where like, okay, they must like him because they were not afraid to burn the red shirt. But, it would have been nice to, have one more year of eligibility instead of playing the 5 games on special teams. But that's one of those tough decisions that coaches make. So there was a lot of buzz about him, but until you see him, you just, you don't know for sure. Got off to a very good start this year. There was an unfortunate fumble where he was about to score a touchdown, but he coughed it up at the goal line. So that was a teachable moment. But, very solid year. Got a little dinged up in the second quarter against UConn. I don't know if he was 100% against Clemson, but he looked explosive. He looked like his normal self, but he only got 8 touches. So, they give you the play snaps and it's like, okay, he was out there for 31 plays, but he only had 8 touches, like 5 carries, 3 catches. So I think NC State at its best is if Demi can get to that 15 to 18 touches rather than the 8 that he had against Clemson. So I think if he's healthy, if he's 100%, I could see him getting more touches against Florida State. And he is a little slippery. He runs hard. He's fast enough. He's slippery. He's just you could see he's going to be a very good college running back.
What do you think NC State has to do well offensively against Florida State to be successful in this game?
I think protecting Devin Leary is obviously number one. I think they'll run the ball well enough to keep the defense honest. They don't do the slow mesh like Wake Forest, but you look at the statistics from the different games. What has hurt FSU has been running quarterbacks. It looks like. Well, that's not Devin Leary. The LSU quarterback I think ran for 114 yards, and Malik Cunningham ran for 125 plus.
Yeah, something like 127.
Well, that's not Devin Leary. But the only running back that's really hurt FSU this year was Ellison with doing what he does. And NC State is their backs are very much like Ellison. There's no reason, if Wake Forest can run well, I don't see why, in theory, NC State should run well. The question is the short controlled passing game. They'll have drives where NC State will patiently, have 10 plays and pick up 6 yards on each play, or 5 yards or 4 yards. A lot of singles, a lot of doubles. And that's kind of been the theme. Now, I do think NC State's defense is very good. They might have been on the field out there a little too long against Clemson, but front 7, very solid. Corey Durden, he's going to be fired up, former FSU player. Now, one thing that could be interesting to watch is the other former FSU player, Cyrus Fagan, probably was having the game of his life against Clemson in the first half. Superb game at safety, and then he got hurt, and then Clemson scored right before halftime while he was on the bench. So that helped turn the game around a lot for Clemson, where they were able to go up 13-10 at halftime, have some momentum. Fagan, that it's one of those deals where they didn't want to tell us what he had, but on TV when you watch the replay, there's Holly Rowe saying, "Oh, he has a back injury." So he did not play much or at all in the second half. So it'll be interesting to see if he ends up playing against his old team. The starting nickel, Tyler Baker-Williams, who's also a very good player, experienced senior. He has not played the last 2 games. And then the third secondary dynamic is Derek Pitts, who's a very good corner. One of those well-traveled players who went to West Virginia, Marshall, and NC State. Former 4-star by Rivals. He got dinged for targeting midway through the 4th quarter. So I'm guessing he'll have to miss the first half against FSU.
He will.
So it'll be interesting to see who exactly is out there in the secondary. Now the replacements, because of injuries the last 2 years, they're very experienced replacements. So it's not one of these deals where they're throwing in somebody who's not ready. But there will be drama in terms of who's starting in the secondary against FSU.
Well, listen, you mentioned you moved on to the defense, which is exactly what I was going to do, and you do watch the tape. Very physical defense that gets around. They bring pressure from everywhere. I watched the Clemson game. They walk three linebackers up. They'll bring three, bring one, bring two, bring the free safety. But the 3-3-5, 3-5-3, whatever you want to call the defense that Tony Gibson runs, very aggressive in nature. 19th in scoring defense, 16th in rushing defense, 28th in passing defense. What's interesting is despite the fact that they're 101st in sacks, PFF has them. They're getting plenty of pressure on quarterbacks. PFF has them for 57 pressures so far this year. And what they really do good is what NC State offense doesn't do well. NC State does not allow big plays on defense. They are 14th in big plays over 20 yards, 16th in big plays over 30 yards. So, and that's been the key to Florida State's offense. So that's going to be a dynamic matchup in this game. And you've talked a little bit about Corey Durden and the defensive backs, but to me, where they are exceptional is at linebacker. Isaiah Moore, Drake Thomas, and Peyton Wilson. I believe the three of them rank in the top 5 in tackles at NC State. And what's more impressive, and I want to get into this a little bit, Isaiah Moore, Drake Thomas, and free safety Tanner Ingle are tied with Davin Van, the defensive end, for quarterback hurry. So they are bringing pressure from everywhere. Just talk to us a little bit about what they're doing on defense and what makes them so successful.
With the 3-man line, they want that 280 plus pound defensive lineman. That's why they're still, pursuing heavily Florida State commit Keith Sampson Jr. from New Bern High School in North Carolina. He's probably about 285, 290. He fits, their style in the 3-3-5. They, where they sometimes have trouble is when they don't blitz and it's 3 defensive linemen against 5 offensive linemen. And then all of a sudden the quarterback has all day. And guys can defend, but sometimes it's hard to defend for X amount of seconds. What NC State has done a superb job with is they keep everybody in front of them. That's why they don't give up a lot of big plays. And they were not happy with the way they tackled against East Carolina, but they've been pretty good tackling. And those 3 linebackers that you mentioned, they all have a chance to be, all conference kind of players. I thought Isaiah Moore played arguably his best game against Clemson. He was terrific. Peyton Wilson had, I think, 11 tackles against Clemson. He would be in the NFL now if it wasn't for all the injuries he's had. He's had knee and he's had shoulder injuries. And, there was a scary moment in the early in the season where he was chasing down a back, and next he's on the ground, like not even touched really. And he ended up missing I think the Charleston Southern game maybe, because they didn't have to have him for that game.
Right.
But when he has great speed. Every now and then maybe he'll be a little too over aggressive and can be caught. Clemson got him on a bootleg, for instance, where he crashed in, DJ Ungole crashed out and strolled in for like a 7-8 yard touchdown run, or whatever it was, 4-yard touchdown run, but he probably ran about 8 yards to do it. So there's sometimes where they'll take advantage of his aggressiveness. Drake Thomas is just a very good college linebacker. He'll have a shot at a chance in the pros one day. He's the brother of Thayer Thomas, the wide receiver. So those 3 guys, they're the blitzers. They make the tackles. The scheme is built for them to be the stars. The defensive line's job is to tie up blockers to free up the linebackers. You mentioned Tanner Ingle. He's the kamikaze guy in run support. Now, sometimes he will take the wrong angle. Sometimes he will miss a tackle. Like there was a big play where DJ Ungole ran for whatever it was, 30 yards, 20-some yards. And Tanner had a chance to get him in the hole. And, DJ is obviously 240 pounds. He's a big dude. But Tanner could not get him in the hole, kind of like an ankle tackle attempt. And that freed up DJ to rumble and stumble for the 30-some yards or whatever it was. So there's some, there's a little fine tuning there. But, it's a defense that had almost everybody back except for 2 key players from last year. And they had a whole bunch of reserves that ended up playing last year because 7 defensive players were injured. So, welcoming back Cyrus Fagan, who got hurt in the second game last year. That was a big thing. Peyton Wilson got hurt in the second game last year too. Isaiah Moore got hurt against Miami, which I think was like maybe the 9th game or 7th, 8th, 9th game of the year, somewhere toward the end of the season. And then there was little things where a guy would miss a game or two. So a lot of the younger players were able to get experience that are now considered veterans, I guess, in theory, because of the injuries last year. So it's a good defense. The 30 points against Clemson is a little misleading. But again, like Clemson is Clemson, and playing at home, they get a little extra juice. So, but going back to where you're talking about, they don't give up a lot of big plays. But the only real big play that Clemson could have had, Bo Collins did break free, would have had a touchdown from like 60, 70 yards out. But I can't remember if Bo just dropped it or the pass was just a little too far out of his hands, but they didn't connect on that play. Otherwise, there wasn't a lot of, there was a couple plays where they maybe gained 30 yards or 26 yards, but there wasn't that 50, 60, 70 yard touchdown type play that they just don't give up those type of plays this year.
Now you've already mentioned Corey Durden, the former Florida State nose tackle, who's now is NC State's nose tackle in his, I believe it's second or third year at NC State.
Second year.
Okay. Obviously Corey's a guy that has a lot of ability, can be a dominant player at times. But tell us a little bit about the depth on their defensive front and a little bit more about some of the other guys. Savion Jackson and Davin Van obviously are their other defensive ends. But are they deep at on the defensive front? They rotate?
They basically have a group of 6.
Okay.
They'll play the first string line, and then they usually have the second string line play together. It's a talented group against the run, but again, it's just a little harder to rush the passer, I think, with a 3-man line. I think Davin Van is maybe has the best burst off the corner. They have a big dude, they have, big dudes like CJ Clark's 300 plus pounds. Joshua Harris at nose tackle is 325. These are the backups. These were former 4-star guys who were top 200 players in the rankings. Travali Price is the lightest of the DNs at like around 260, 255. So, it goes back to that where we're talking about with Keith Sampson. Most of these guys are big guys. So Davin Van's probably 285, Savion Jackson's 290. So that it's a different kind of, they don't have like a Jared Verse. They don't have that 6'5", 250 kid who could really turn the corner. It's always fascinating how recruiting has changed, where some of their best defensive ends of the past, I don't know if they would have been recruited now because of the preference for the size. But like we talked about before, though, that's where the linebackers or sometimes a nickel or a safety blitzing is try to create the chaos is that way. But it's just a little harder when it's whenever they do the 3-man line versus 5 offensive linemen.
Yeah, it puts defenses in the RPO offenses have put defenses in conflict. What do you defend? Because you can only defend so much on any one given play. What they've been really good at doing, just like their offense, they've been excellent on third down defense, only giving up 28.5% of their third down opportunities by opposing offenses, which is 20th best in the nation. What is the key to their third down defense from what you've seen?
Good tackling, good speed. They keep the play in front of them. They have that zone defense where if they got 8 guys, you'll see many plays where a guy catches the ball and there's 3-4 guys converging on that player. They don't have too many mental mistakes. Every now and then there's a play where the coaches will grumble after the game. For instance, this past week, Will Shipley slipped behind the defense, caught a controversial, I think it was 26 yards down to the 1-yard line. Big controversy on whether he fumbled or not at the end of that play, but the refs and the replay didn't seem to worry about the fumble part, just where his knee was down. So, and then Clemson scored, and that was the big momentum thing going into halftime. But other than like that, there's not a lot of this. They don't do a lot of self-inflicted wounds, I guess. That would be the best way of describing NC State's defense, is that they keep guys in front and they make the tackle, and they have good speed. I don't know what these guys will run at the NFL Combine, but I think they have very good college speed.
Yeah. All right. So FSU and Florida State's offense coming to town. Jordan Travis is probably a little bit different quarterback than any quarterback NC State has faced this year. Florida State is a team that has relied on big plays in its offense, particularly in the passing game with Johnny Wilson and Micah Pittman. FSU is much deeper wide receiver than it has been in many years.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think NC State successfully defends Jordan Travis?
The joke down here is that it's the first time where they got to play Jordan. He was hurt one year and he was sick the other year.
Yeah.
So two different times they were expecting to play him and game plan for him, and then he did not play. I know his rushing stats aren't the same this year as the past, but we know he's a good runner.
Yeah.
I think everybody understands that. Holton Ahlers from East Carolina, had a few good runs. DJ Ungole, as I mentioned earlier, he had a big run, but they haven't faced someone who, in theory, could, take off 10 times and gain, 60, 70 yards. They haven't had to face that kind of quarterback this season. So, I think he's, the big talking points this week is that, the coaches believe Travis is more of a quarterback this year, where in the past, when they would study him, he was more athlete. So, you mentioned the receivers, State's not had to play a 6'7", whatever Johnny Wilson is.
Yeah, most people don't.
They haven't faced that kind of tall receiver. Obviously Pittman is coming off a big game against Wake Forest. So there's a little more juice in the receiving core, as you mentioned. I thought the younger tight end, the sophomore tight end, looked like he's got a nice future for Florida State.
Marquise Douglas, yes,
he looked like he has a chance to be pretty good. The thing that I found fascinating is I didn't realize this is that everybody's back on, and well, in theory, everyone could be back on Florida State's defense. All the starters are not seniors. There isn't one senior on the depth chart, and then
maybe Cooper.
Yeah, I don't know if he was listed as a starter or not, but I think 2 offensive linemen and then one of the rotational tight ends are the only seniors on offense.
Yeah.
So this is a different FSU team that is basically a year away from probably being where they want to be, and the question is how much have they improved going into this one? State, there's going to be a lot made of how State recovers emotionally from losing at Death Valley. Historically, they've been pretty good bouncing back, and it helps having, like, they're the opposite. They're the team that has a ton of seniors, a lot of super seniors. Like we met, even, Durden and Fagan wouldn't normally be on the team this year,
right?
But they're super seniors. Thayer Thomas, Grant Gibson, the center, these are super seniors. So it's a different dynamic where, a lot of these guys, and then a couple of them got hurt last year. So then they came back because they weren't in the best draft stock situation, like Peyton Wilson or Isaiah Moore. So, like, the reason why the hype for NC State this year is, like, everybody was back, so this was quote unquote, they're supposed to be their year.
Yep.
This was the time to do it. And so there will be some emotional damage that was done by the Clemson game, because, now they don't control their own destiny. Now they need somebody else to beat Clemson, and Clemson's already beaten Wake Forest. So, State might need help from Florida State, NC State might need help from Syracuse, but they're going to have to get help from someone. And they don't play, the tougher teams, if there is a tougher team in the Coastal. So it's there will be some emotional heartache that they have to recover from Saturday too. But I, very good team. I mean, they're ranked 14th. They're probably in that 14 to 20 range. There probably is you saw the recruiting differences against Clemson.
Yep.
In years past, there's been times where there was obviously recruiting differences with Florida State. I think the biggest takeaway from this season is NC State doesn't have that high margin for error, against the really good teams.
Yeah,
You know,
that's same
they
for
have to play. I hate saying the word flawless because who plays flawless? But they have to have a lot of things go right. They have to stay on track offensively. They have to not turn the ball over. They have to, not have any, injuries. That's how they can compete against the other teams that are ranked in the top 20. But there was a difference, I think, in NFL talent when you saw the NC State Clemson game. But again, like they may not face anybody the rest of this season that has that kind of defensive talent, and especially that Clemson defensive line.
How is this FSU team perceived by NC State fans compared to previous years, last 2 or 3?
I think, I don't know I can't really sum up the fan base. I think the perception is, and I could be wrong. I think the perception is that FSU is better this year. And I think everybody saw how hard they hit the portal, and clearly the portal helped them.
Yeah.
And, I think there still is that train of thought of, everyone knows FSU brings in top 15 recruiting classes, but it still is not completely translated to the field yet. I didn't watch the LSU game. I just saw the Wake Forest game. So, I mean, I won't say I'm an expert on FSU, but, I think the fan base respects that they're better this year. But, when people think of FSU in these parts, they think of the juggernaut teams. Obviously FSU fans do too, I'm sure. But,
this is a good team.
There were, in the past when FSU, I mean, Chuck Amato fired up that rivalry, in a way that made it unique.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that, and that was one of my questions.
So that there's always been a healthy rivalry, a little like low key simmering rivalry that Chuck created between NC State and FSU in his own way. And, people still talk about the game where I think EJ Manuel and crew came into Carter Finley, and both teams really weren't that great on offense. But the next, Mike Lennon, started hitting a little slant over the middle. Next, NC State wins 17-16, and people are still doing podcasts this week with the guy that the heavier student who, got up on the goalpost or was whipping the towel or the t-shirt or whatever, like that still is talked about to this day. So like that's kind of like the FSU team that NC State fans probably remember. But I think this year's team, or at least for this game, a home game at home under the lights, even after a Clemson loss, there's going to be there's confidence in the fan base that, this is not going to be a problematic game. So if FSU beats NC State on Saturday, I can tell you it's going to be a very upset fan base, and my message boards will be jumping on Sunday.
Well, listen, like you said, this has turned into a little bit of a rivalry. Not quite Florida State, Miami, or Florida State, Florida, and probably not quite NC State, North Carolina. But certainly these teams get a little physical with each other. It's always a little bit chippy when these two teams play, and I think we're going to see.
And NC State's usually had a healthy amount of kids from Florida.
Yeah.
And they love playing Florida State. So, I don't, the recruiting in Florida has kind of ebbed and flowed over the years. But obviously when Chuck Amato was there, he recruited a ton of players from Florida.
Oh yeah, he was a great recruiter down there in Miami, South Florida area. Did well for Florida State and for Clemson. But listen, I think I don't think these fan bases like each other. I don't think these teams like each other. I know when I talk to my buddies, they love going to all Florida State games, but they do not like going to Carter Finley Stadium. They are not very welcome there. So it's going to be an interesting night. Like you said, everybody's going to be lubed up by 8 p.m. for this 8 p.m. kickoff, and it is a huge game for both teams as they try to pursue the ACC Atlantic. Listen, despite the fact that Florida State is playing at NC State, I will be there, as will probably a couple thousand FSU fans. Tell us a little bit about maybe some local spots, restaurants, bars, sightseeing that we should take in around the Raleigh area that may not be well known from somebody that doesn't travel to Raleigh a lot.
Well, the thing that people that go to the game itself, they'll learn real fast. There's a lot. There's a state fairground. There's land and land and land and land, and that becomes tailgate heaven. So I think I've been to Tallahassee, and I remember thinking like, wow, they're tailgating at the McDonald's, or they're tailgating at the bank. They're all over the place. Well, at State, it's just open land. Some of that land got taken away because they built, I don't know if they're apartments or condos, but just a massive amount of land to tailgate. So it's a sea of tailgating going into the game. What State does not have, which has been debated over and over and over, there's not a lot around the stadium. There's a restaurant called Backyard Bistro. It was big news in our little world that a Bojangles opened up like about 6 blocks away. And there's a Wendy's and there's a gas station, and then there's a high school and there's businesses. So, I mean, that it's not one of those places where you go to the stadium and then you walk around and, it's not like, some of the other cities. Like if you go,
everything to do is in Cary.
no, I don't know about just Cary, but there's not a lot of walking, not a lot of things to do that is within walking distance of the stadium.
Right.
So, if they want a absolute incredible meal, if they're in on a, like say Friday and they want to have a great meal, Angus Barn, it's pricey, but it's worth every penny. There's a couple, there's some mall areas that have lots of restaurants. 3 of them are three of the larger ones, Crabtree, which is closest to NC State, and then South Point, which is kind of in that Durham. It's considered Durham, but it kind of feels like Chapel Hill, like in that little gray area, west of Raleigh, and then Briar Creek, which is kind of like my little home area because I'm about 6-7 miles away. They have some places, a lot of restaurants, a lot of shopping. So those are kind of like the three main hubs. I guess the younger crowd will find things to have fun to do on Hillsborough Street downtown or Glenwood. But those days are long past for me. But
me too.
yeah. But the cool thing about the Triangle is having Duke, UNC, and NC State within 30 minutes, and it's probably one of the rare places in the country where people generally do talk college sports every single day. The sports radio people in town, there's an endless amount of topics to delve into between when having that, and then Winston-Salem is only about an hour and a half away for Wake Forest. And some people don't even realize Wake Forest used to be in the area.
Yeah.
The town of Wake Forest is actually in the Raleigh area, and that's where Wake Forest was. But the tobacco company bought the school basically and moved it to Winston-Salem in the 1950s. So people always like to tell the story about when Arnold Palmer was a golfer at Wake Forest. He was actually in the Raleigh area going to the school in Wake Forest. But
I don't think I knew that. That's
yeah.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, it's one of those unique things where I think Duke was the same way. They got bought in I think 1917. I think their original school was called like Trinity or something.
Okay.
So it's like little Raleigh area, little triangle factoids. But the Hurricanes are also a big deal for NHL hockey, but it's a different feel. I'm sure you guys kind of go through the same thing in Tallahassee where, it's cool that Orlando has a pro team or Jacksonville or Tampa or Miami, but they're so far away.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the vibe with the Carolina Panthers and the Charlotte Hornets, where it's like, they're in Charlotte, but that's a good 2.5 hours away. So, that's why college sports really runs this area.
So, I'm glad it does. It's you're right. It is a unique area with all the colleges right around that area. Like you said, 3 within about 12 miles of each other, 20 miles of each other, and then obviously Wake Forest just right up the road, and East Carolina's not too far from you guys either. So it's a great college state. Well, JC, listen, I appreciate you joining us. I know you're busy. We appreciate all the insight on NC State. Should be a great game. The atmosphere is going to be electric, I would think. Like you said, under the lights. And I do hope
Yeah.
that you're the one that's dealing with angry message boards and not us. But I want to thank you for jumping on here with us and for our Know Your Enemy NC State edition. And we'll be catching up with you again, JC. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thank you.